Criterion Correction. My name is Ed.
And I'm Dr. Bluesmaster Zed.
In this podcast, we'll be delving deep into the Criterion collection of films, trying to figure out what exactly it says about cinema as a whole, and what makes a movie worthy of being added to the collection. Join us as we decide, should we collect them all? This week, we travel to a world. That is 2001's Ghost World. You know, Dr. Z, after watching Ghost World, I have a pitch for a Ghost World reboot.
Okay. I mean, I don't know why we need a reboot, but sure.
It's been 16 years. It's been forever. It's more than enough time for a reboot.
It doesn't need to be a reboot. It could be a continuation. Things don't need to be reboots, but go for it. Give me your tired, rehashed Hollywood BS.
You know, maybe you're right. Maybe it's not a reboot. Maybe it is a continuation, because I think it can even still star Scarlett Johansson and Thora Birch. They can even be the same characters, but you see, it's a dystopian world, because that hasn't been done, and it is a world where Pac-Man is gone, and he has abandoned us because he is a god, and now they must hunt Pac-Man's enemies before it becomes a world of ghosts.
Pac-Man, like Manny Pacquiao, the championship boxer?
You of all people are going for a boxing reference? No, I mean the video game Pac-Man.
What connection does that have with anything?
Because his enemies are called ghosts, and so if Pac-Man is gone, then the world would be full of ghosts, and nobody would be there to stop them, except for Thora Birch and Scarlett Johansson.
Somehow I don't see Enid really giving a damn about that.
Well, you see, in the meantime, she has gone to school, learned to become a better person, learned art, and she's going to use art to kill the ghosts.
I mean, I feel like she knew art before she took that stupid course in the movie, so not quite seeing the development here.
No, she's learned how to do even better art. She can do like 3D printing, and so she can 3D print cool guns to end up killing the ghosts.
You're really set on this. Man, what a violent movie. Gosh, does everything have to be violence with you? Are you just like one of these obsessive violence gun video game kind of people here? You're talking about Pac-Man. Maybe you should be talking about Call of Duty.
Dr. Z, it's brand synergy. You have something about ghosts, you have Pac-Man as a exploitable property, and you have to get rid of the ghosts somehow, so you shoot him.
Well, why are you working so hard at this? Just make a re-envisioning of the Ghostbusters that stars Enid and Becky. And then you don't even have to go through all this trouble. You just add them to the existing Paul Feig, whatever it is now.
Oh, you just got hatred on the internet for that one.
Why?
Because you said something nice about Ghostbusters.
Oh, what's so wrong with Ghostbusters? Good grief.
I don't know, but I know there's going to be a lot wrong with my poetic plot. Rebecca and Enid graduate, and so now we're free to continue to belittle and berate the common peasantry. A victim born is Seymour, who placed a personal ad. They trick him into meeting his amour, so that when she's not there, he ends up sad. But Enid starts to sympathize with him and finds a kindred soul, all while competing for an art prize during her summer school black hole. While her and Seymour become friends, her and Rebecca drift apart. They thought they'd be roommates in the end, but Enid has another course to chart. Then she loses her theater post. Then her art project gets banned. Then she sleeps with Seymour, who, engrossed with her, then tells his girlfriend that she is canned. Eventually Seymour finds out about the girl's earlier trick. He lands in the hospital with a bout of being beat up with ninja sticks. Enid apologizes and decides to leave her town upon the bus. Maybe she'll find upon her ride, what is all this adulthood fuss?
I mean, you hop on a ghost bus, you get to a cool ghost place.
Where Pac-Man's ghosts end up reigning. Oh, and Steve Buscemi could come back and he could be like the Obi-Wan to the girls.
Dude, I think that you're just going to have a little trouble because people have already done like the Return of Pac-Man in Pixels and they ain't having it.
Yeah, but that was with Adam Sandler. This would be way cooler.
I'm sorry, Pac-Man's credibility has been shot by appearing in that movie. It's a sad day.
Sad day indeed.
So yeah, where do you want to begin with this? Because for a movie based on a graphic novel, I gotta say it's interesting.
I think it is interesting, and I'll start with kind of what I like most about this film, and something that other coming-of-age stories have sometimes done and sometimes not done. And that is the fact that both Rebecca and Enid, though primarily Enid, are assholes and are portrayed as such, and not in a way that makes you hate them, but makes you understand that they are immature, which is what teenagers are. And I think that's a tack that too few coming-of-age teenage films don't really take or have the bravery to take.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know, I guess what I hesitate with is your description of them as assholes. I mean, certainly they are not morally upstanding individuals. I think I agree with you on that, though, in that I was really impressed how it treats these characters as fully fleshed individuals who have complex thoughts, yet those complex thoughts clearly are not necessarily fully developed. And like you said, I think that very frequently, if you have a coming of age story, you're often treated to some precocious, advanced, introspective character who's an old soul or something like that. And here you have all of the drama of adolescence, which is filtered in a way that is neither portrayed as totally stupid, but also is not portrayed as, oh, these characters have insights that the adult world has forsaken or has, lost sight of.
I completely agree. And I compare and contrast this with two other teen-oriented coming-of-age films starring women that I both enjoy but are coming at this from different ends. You have a film like Juno where, yes, the lead character is an idiosyncratic old soul, but she really does kind of fit more into what you're saying as having those insights that, but while still being a little bit immature. And then you have a film I really like that I think compares and would be a great double bill with this, The Edge of 17, where the lead character, again, is an old soul and describes herself as such, but is also similarly kind of an unthinking, though still sympathetic jackass. Man, there's a lot of old soul teens in coming of age films.
Yeah, and I guess even here, in terms of Enid's interest in older pop culture, the whole focus around jazz, the whole sort of older musical periods that are emphasized here, it goes down that path slightly, but it does so in a way that doesn't represent as, oh, this is what we should be treasuring, or this is showcasing her maturity, because far from. It's really the spectacle. It's, I think, a challenge that most of us face at some point, which is looking at the world and kind of criticizing its absurdities and looking at it through this lens where everything seems magnified in terms of there is no normal, or normal is boring, and you're looking for the outsiders, the people like Seymour who are edgy, almost neo-hipsters at the time this was filmed. And here it's just this comparison of like, okay, normal, there is no normal here, that everyone has their own sort of like weirdness, and part of growing up is learning how to grapple with that and figure out what it means and what we want to focus on, and how we kind of take these tensions that we're faced with and use them potentially for something productive, but also falter like Enid does, and missing a lot of these different opportunities. And far from it being, oh, she's working outside the system, there's a moment when it really is kind of a regret that, oh, I've messed up this thing that's going to be hard to fix.
At a certain point, during that the sequence where she is promised a 1-year art scholarship. I thought that was going to be the film kind of letting her have a way out, that like everything else could be torched to ashes, but she would have that, and that would be her escape. But no, everything crumbles around her. And not that I necessarily like seeing somebody absolutely miserable, but I think in terms of the message the film is pushing, it had to get that bad for her, and I'm glad it did in this, of course, fictional context.
Yeah, that there's no pulled punches here. This isn't a glamorized depiction of adolescence or adulthood, that neither one comes off looking all that great. And I think I appreciate that, especially in light of some of the other movies that might kind of fall into this sort of genre, like Dazed and Confused.
Though I will say that in the push and pull between adolescence and adulthood, I think adolescence comes off way worse than adulthood does.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, you look at Seymour, and it's not as though he has a fulfillment. And even I appreciate just the everyday despair. And this sounds really depressing, but even just looking at the character of his therapist at the end, and this sort of rote, repetitive existence. And the movie is really delving into what does it mean to, be alive, and what does it mean to have a goal, and should we follow the cookie cutter high achieving students, or should we really admire these individuals who aren't living that particular lifestyle, even while someone like Seymour is clearly faced with some emotional regrets and trauma as a result of living outside of, say, the status quo or the lowest common denominator, however you want to look at it. And I don't know. I don't think adulthood really does come off much better than adolescence in this.
And of course I'm comparing the visions of adolescence and adulthood through the characters, and you do make some valid points that, yeah, adulthood ain't that great, but I think where it differs for me, and where I think adolescence comes off a little bit worse, is that none of the adults are cruel. They may not be perfect, but they're not cruel, whereas particularly Enid, and to a lesser extent Rebecca, you see them being very casually cruel and pulling these pranks and things on particularly the adults, but not exclusively them. And it's not that they're evil or that they are filled with malice. They're young and they don't know the impact of their words and actions.
And well, maybe that's part of the message then, is because even then, I don't necessarily think that adolescence has it worse in a sense, but really it is, maybe that's why it's such an awkward time in our lives, is we are learning to empathize with others. And that might be Enid's full emotional journey, is that she starts by kind of callously and thoughtlessly playing with this guy's emotions, then getting a sense of who he really is over time, and coming to greatly sort of regret what she's done to him, and recognize again this notion that all of these characters that might at first seem very shallow in this movie, like we might assume of people that we don't know well in our own lives, actually have their own, struggles, tribulations, their own deep internal selves.
Oh, I completely agree. And that actually brings me to a thought that I was having, especially as Ghost World was reaching its end. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you know the site TV Tropes, right?
Yes.
So one that I remember being there is, and one that I always, well, I won't say enjoyed, but that stuck with me, is the reason you suck speech, where a character who needs to have comeuppance delivered upon them has somebody deliver a monologue on why they suck. And that doesn't ever happen here. I was thinking that it might, but it never does. And I'm curious if you think that is a weakness that it doesn't ever do that, or a strength that it comes more organically instead of that speech? And I think I've kind of put my finger on the scale there, but I'm still intrigued as to what your thoughts are.
Well, first of all, I actually haven't explored that particular trope, so I will definitely have to go visit TV tropes in the near future. I think, though, that in a lot of ways, the movie benefits from that. And I think it benefits from really breaking down some of the narrative structures of a coming-of-age story. That you don't have a lot of resolution. You don't have these grand sweeping epiphanies. At the end of the movie, you can see that Enid has grown in some way, but it's not as though, it's suddenly clear what's going to happen. And we can even talk about some of the more depressing metaphors of what's going on here, but I'm going to assume happy ending things sort of this way. You can see this kind of growth, but it's not as though, she's hit upon the secret of this. It's a reiteration that I think through Seymour's character, that even adulthood, you still don't necessarily have a clear idea of what it is you should be doing, that what makes life meaningful. And because of that, I was just really taken in by just the entire atmosphere of this movie, because it is so anti-dramatic in some ways.
I was thinking of your comment from back when we talked about Dazed and Confused about films in the 90s not having to have very much happen. And that is, I mean, I think more happens here than like some of the other films that we've talked about in terms of having a fully formed narrative. But I think this definitely feeds into that kind of heading.
Yeah, that it does sort of have, I mean, there's definitely tension. There's definitely some drama that occurs here, but it's not nearly as melodramatic as a movie like this could get. And I think one of the things that really sold this to me were the performances of the leads, and in particular Steve Buscemi. That I've got to say, he did a lot with this character that must have been just so interesting and weird to play.
I was reading some trivia that basically he felt so awkward with this character that he, when shooting was done for the day, he would basically change clothes entirely so he didn't have to, so he could have some separation between himself and the character.
Oh, I can see that. It's so weird because so much of it had to have been a subtle performance, because you're playing a character that has to be at the same time sympathetic, but weird, but not so weird as to alienate your audience. It's a real challenge.
I mean, that's why Steve Buscemi is a great actor. I love him pretty much everywhere. I think even when he showed up in Armageddon, he actually made it more bearable for like 5 seconds at least.
Yeah, that's true. He's one of the shining lights of Armageddon.
And to be fair, of most things that he is in. Speaking of actors that popped up here, I know that, I mean, obviously even you know who Scarlett Johansson is.
Oh my God, I just connected. Yes, I know.
Did you see one of your, since I know you're an Arrested Development fan, did you see somebody from there show up?
Oh, David Cross. Yes, David Cross. I was that amused me too.
So you alluded to the end of the film a moment ago, and I want to talk about that because I hate it when films don't cut when they should cut, because in my opinion, I was hoping that that final cut was going to come when Enid sees Norman board the bus, ride away, cuts to the reaction shot, fades to black for a moment, and then I was hoping it would not fade back in. And it does, and it made me very, very mildly angry. And not that having the further 2 or 3 minutes like kills anything, but I thought, man, that would have been perfect. What are your thoughts?
I kind of agree, if only because at that point it would have been, I don't know, a more striking image than having Enid get on the bus at the end. Also, just because it has a really creepy vibe to the end with that final scene.
What do you mean creepy?
Well, I don't really want to chase this too far down this path, but Norman gets on the bus that supposedly isn't coming. It's an old bus. It drives off. What does that represent?
I took it to represent hope.
Hope. Okay, so that's definitely one way of representing it. Yes, hope. The other end of the spectrum.
I'm not sure where you're pushing me on this one, so please, sorry to do it to you, but you're gonna have to push on with this one yourself.
Death.
Leaving equals no.
I mean, in the brief research I did, it is not an uncommon thought to question whether this could stand in for death. And I'm not saying I want to read the movie that way either. Also, it just like for me that is honestly something that did occur to me in that last scene. I was like, I was a little bit worried in terms of the implications of what was going to happen to this character moving forward. And in the end, I decided I wanted to believe, I guess, more in the way you described it, hope.
Well, or even if you want to fit it into kind of your reading, maybe death and rebirth.
That could also be.
I will say I did not read it that way. I can see why you would, especially since Norman is an elderly gentleman, and so this is him finally being taken home on an out-of-service bus. Yeah, I can see that reading. But again, even if you want to say that's what it means for Norman, I think that especially since we get Enid's dream about leaving and starting over, if that is supposed to be death, I think it is more symbolic death than a literal one. Again, a symbolic death with a rebirth on the horizon.
No, that works, and I think that's the only reason why I'm kind of also like you, in that when the movie faded back in, I was a little worried in terms of what is this aiming to do in this last cut.
I don't think the last few minutes are bad, but seeing Steve Buscemi again, while I love seeing Steve Buscemi, it doesn't really add anything to his arc, in my opinion. And I could get the implication that Enid would board the bus more from just cutting from her reaction shot than actually seeing her do it. Again, it's actually a rather pretty shot when she does actually board it. I'm just not sure I needed it.
Yeah, well, for me, again, I think that the Steve Buscemi shot was also just reiterating the kind of sense that there's not an easy answer to these problems, and he is not fixed as a result of having this interaction. Far from. We're all kind of struggling to figure out what is important and worthwhile. I will ask, did you stick around for the very, very end?
I did not, but I read about it on IMDb.
I'm glad I left it playing at the very end. That was cathartic.
Let's not spoil it. Let's just say that for anybody at home watching Ghost World, stick around. It's a Marvel. See, it is a comic book movie. It even has a post-credit scene. I've got only a couple other things I want to talk about. So, as you mentioned, this is based on a graphic novel, and Enid fancies herself an artist, and we see her attending art class. What did you think about the not particularly subtle critiques on modern art versus more popular art?
One, of course, a comic book movie is well in its right to bring up this distinction, because often it's an art form that is seen as low culture. And I think that's shifted quite a bit in the past few years, but ultimately it makes sense that it's going to go in this critique of looking at high versus low art. But what I appreciated is, again, it did not take the easy way out, because at first I was totally like, this art teacher is the worst, the absolute worst, and this is everything that's wrong with postmodern criticism and the bullshit narratives that often accompany really avant-garde pieces, in which you're wondering, is this legitimate, or is this some crap that was made up to appeal to an audience that wants to be pretentious about something? And it holds itself back by rendering the art teacher at least a little sympathetic and getting into the power of art to grapple with these kinds of questions. And maybe the art teacher is still on the simplistic end of the scale, looking at high art versus low art. But it was interesting just in terms of recognizing that, yeah, what Enid is initially producing is not the penultimate form of artistic expression, that there's room for growth and development. It might not be quite the same as coat hanger sculpture, but it's recognizing the many ways in which art can influence us. And, you know, it's a meta commentary on what this piece might be attempting to do as well.
Yeah, and you are certainly right that the art teacher is not the parody that she could have been. But what do you make of the fact that the art project that does end up getting Enid acclaim is someone else's work that she has done nothing to comment on?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting case where, again, I mean, it goes towards sort of avant-garde productions in which you're making a case for, is she repurposing this? Is it remixed as a result of changing its space of circulation? And in this case, the answer there is kind of no, but at the same time, it is a provocative piece. So I don't know. I don't know.
But a provocative piece that she did nothing with. Like, I know we are supposed to mock the other art students' efforts, but the wire hanger sculpture, it at least took effort, and the whole found art of tampon in the teacup, at least she had to put the tampon in the teacup. Enid literally does nothing. She does she does nothing to in art. Like, I'm all for remix art or commenting on other art, but that's not what happens. It's just the juxtaposition. Well, it's not even really juxtaposition. If it had been in an art exhibit where this is commenting on the other art around it, that would be one thing. It doesn't really do that. It's just it's almost a testament to kind of her effort. Give the art teacher what she wants.
No, that is true, and I think in some ways she's trolling the art teacher with that,
and it works.
It does, and I think that is definitely a commentary on modern art. And I mean, if you've ever seen something that's, I think, wasn't it recently that someone like put a pair of glasses on the floor of an art museum and people literally thought it was an installation?
I didn't see that. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, there was a story where, again, they were trolling the art community by just taking a pair of like reading glasses, putting them on the floor of this gallery, and you have photos of people taking intense photos trying to figure out what this means. And it gets into a real question of what is art? How do we draw the boundaries? And if you're using this for some purpose, does that make it art? And again, I'm not willing to totally discount it. I totally understand the critique here, and I think that in a lot of ways it does make a lot of valid points in terms of how we value artistic expression, but I don't know.
Well, and you're definitely right that, yes, part of the joke is that Enid gets acclaim through doing this thing to troll the teacher. I understand that. But then the fact that she temporarily benefits from that is, I mean, I guess that you could say that's a further part of the critique, but I don't know. I mean, I guess if you want to kind of support some of the things that we've been dancing around before, it touches back on, it's not that she has any, well, it's not that she's untalented, but it's not that she has this piercing insight that gets her the scholarship offer. It's luck.
Well, here's the thing, and it's a little bit of both, because in the classroom, at least, she can rationalize this. I think what we're also supposed to see is the art teacher initially, when they're going to censor the poster, says, well, you should hear from the artist first to justify this. And Enid is not there. She is not putting in the effort to actually provide an explanation. So it's a spectrum of, yeah, it's a found piece of art, but if you're going to argue for it being art in some repurposed way, then it's a good idea to be able to understand how it functions and to consciously be able as the artist to at least grapple with that. And again, it comes too late that she approaches after this about the art scholarship, that she's not even serious about that at first, but then she's like, oh, this is my lifeline, and they yank the lifeline away, perhaps because she wasn't truly invested or involved in that because she wasn't there.
All right. No, that is indeed a fair reading, so props for that. The last thing I wanted to talk about for a moment is Scarlett Johansson, who is second billed in this movie, and who would have thought that she'd ever have been in a movie, even one early in her career, where she was second billed to Thora Birch.
I mean, makes sense in this. She's a good supporting character, but Thora Birch is the one who's doing most of the work here.
Oh, absolutely. And what I find interesting with what we've seen her career, at least so far, turn out to be, again, I think Scarlett Johansson has this rap as being not a particularly emotive actress. I don't think that's particularly fair for what it's worth, but you definitely see that in this movie. And again, it's definitely tied to the character. But other than that, there's not a lot that indicates kind of where her career would go.
But again, I think the strength of this movie is in subtlety. It's in the subtle performances. And she plays a good example of a high schooler who is trying to adapt to the adult world and perhaps taking a different path than Enid, but, struggling with it in her own way. Again, like, she's not the main focus here, and I think you're right in that it doesn't really showcase where her career is going to go, but it's done well enough, again, that you recognize this is a person who is trying to adapt to the adult world, and like most of us, struggling in some way. That it's not necessarily the easiest or most fun thing, and you get these competing narratives of these different paths between the two characters. So which path is right? And there's not an answer.
Yeah, I agree. I think that while yes, Scarlett Johansson's Rebecca is not the main focus, she does get her moments. The camera does focus on her reactions, on what the audience can presume she's thinking, and the path that she's taking. So I agree. I think that is a strength of the film. Well, with that, let's move into our final segment: collect them all or collect not at all. Do we think this is a ghost world, or do we think this is a most world?
Oh. And I thought Pac-Man was bad.
Well, you dissing Pac-Man, bruh?
Yes, yeah, I am. For me, this is totally a yes. It's a keep for many reasons. It is a movie that does a fantastic job representing the awkwardness of adolescence and the awkwardness of adulthood, and the idea that one does not necessarily fade into some kind of normal and suddenly discover this is what life is, but that it is a constant process of figuring out what the hell should we do with the time we're given here. So the performances here were fantastic. I think the entire main and supporting cast both did a really awesome job of creating lively and weird characters, but not in such a way that it felt totally disconnected from reality. That we've all had experiences with the kinds of people we see in this movie, or we may have aspects of these persons in our own personalities. But it's a really interesting movie that I think does a good job of grappling with the subject in a mature way through characters that are struggling to achieve maturity.
And for my part, I did on the whole enjoy this film myself, once I realized that our main characters were supposed to be hateful, but not in an evil way. While it ends up making the film a little bit more rough than I kind of expected, I enjoy that it at least actively engages with the idea that Enid is is slightly cruel, but only in the way teenagers are, and she is still learning how to be an adult. And the film's ending, at least in my reading, does give us the slim hope that she might eventually learn how to be one on her terms. Well, Dr. Z, if our listeners want to tell us what they think about Ghost World or other things that we've talked about, how could they contact us?
Fans want to get in touch with us, they can go to Instagram and find us. We are Criterion Correction. That is where we have most of our interaction with fans. They can also find us on Facebook. We are the Criterion Correction. We'd love to hear your feedback, your suggestions, your tips, your deepest thoughts about movies. And if you are really a fan, we'd ask you sincerely to rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, your podcatcher of choice.
Excellent. And what will we be pursuing next week, Dr. Z?
So next week, we are going to be watching a fantastic movie, and I know it's fantastic because it's a sequel to a movie we both enjoyed previously. We'll be watching Lady Snowblood, Love Song of Vengeance.
For the Criterion Correction, I've been Ed.
I've been Dr. Bluesmaster Zed.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The theme song for the Criterion Correction was composed by Chris Wrigley of Bunhouse Jingles. You can listen to more of his work at podcastthemesongs.com.